All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So welcome, and thanks for joining. So welcome to really the next session in our Moving Faster with Hive webinar series. My name is Andrew, and I'll be with you today really for the next hour while we focus on constructing a new project intake process in Hive. Really, projects are at the core of every business and company initiative. They're how we get things done and really produce great work. So really, how can we, though, create an intake process in Hive to review and sign off on new projects? That's what we're going to be exploring today. So in this webinar, we're going to look at how we can better leverage Hive to support three critical steps in the intake process. The first is capturing the scope. The second is reviewing the scope. And then the third is launching the approved projects once they have been fully signed off and are ready to be begin into production. So with that, before we jump directly in, just a little bit about myself and my background. I've been with Hive for almost 2 years now. Before Hive, I spent nearly 6 years working as a management consultant, helping some of the top global companies improve their operations and strategic challenges. At Hive, I'm the strategic engagement lead, where I partner with our enterprise clients, primarily to make sure that they're getting the most out of Hive. And that includes helping them to identify ways Hive can help their project management and operational needs. I do always love to share some of my favorite features in Hive. Hopefully there are some of yours as well, but if you haven't explored them already, I love using Hive Notes, proofing and approvals, and then the portfolio view. I think those are some of our best features. And before we go much further, just want to cover a few rules of play for today. If you have a question, please drop it into the Hive, basically into the chat here. We'll be setting aside time at the end to cover those questions and go over any questions that may come up. If you'd like a copy of this deck, we can share it out after the webinar. And then additionally, if you haven't already gone there already, help.hive.com is another great resource at your disposal for accessing our Hive help articles. They often have more information about different Hive capabilities, background on them, how to set them up, and then more details and often short videos or little GIFs showing them in action. And then additionally, if at any point that you're within Hive and you need help on how to take advantage of different features, or you just like to talk about something you might be seeing, you can access the blue question mark on the upper right hand side of Hive and start our message with our Hive support team. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into constructing an intake process. So before we begin too much, let's just level set on what we mean today about when we're talking about an intake process and creating what that looks like. So really, this is just a process to review and approve new project requests. At a high level, it's really that simple. So, getting the ideas for the new request, how do you go about the process of creating a process for that, making sure that that process gets everybody involved who needs to approve and review it. And then ultimately, how do you take the process, those requests, and convert them into full projects? So today, that's what we're going to look at, is really how to establish that formal standardized process. So we don't have to chase back through email threads for approvals, or maybe we find out too late that even though a project had a department that needed to be part of it or involved a department, maybe they weren't part of the approval process for reviewing the scope, and we kind of find out too late. So just making sure that the right people are involved up front. This session, really, it's meant to be a mix of our advice and my experience so that we can kind of workshop ways in Hive in which you can create a framework for an intake process. So carrying that a little bit further, let's break down into three main pillars that are going to drive today's session in terms of an intake process. The first is capturing the scope. So how are we going to make sure that we are getting the information upfront? Where do we go to get that information? And then what happens once it's submitted for a new request? The second is actually reviewing that scope. So reviewing the information that came through, making sure that we get the right resources involved as well. And then finally, the third is launching the approved project. So once we actually have approval for this request, how can we quickly, with a few clicks of a button, launch them into full project plans? So let's start with capturing the scope. essentially, again, this is really just a question of when we have a new project that comes in, how do we right size it? How do we make sure that we're capturing the information, the right information up front? And that's what we're going to talk through during the next few minutes. So to take a look at kind of what we hear from many of our customers as they are first beginning their journey on Hive, or kind of talking about their existing processes for projects that come through, we often hear that, well, the process is that we don't have a process. Maybe that the requests come to them or their team via email, phone calls, kind of offline chats maybe, and they try to piece together the scope along the way, and maybe it comes through via piecemeal in that manner as well. We often hear maybe that it's a challenge just to get that information in one place. Again, they might get the information from different venues, different places. So there's not a consistent centralized spot to go. So the status quo of doing an approval route, or rather a new project intake process in that manner, it can lead and kind of perpetuate confusion. It can often lead to waste, and oftentimes rework. If you're not pulling in the right people, the project may not be scoped properly, and it hasn't been properly reviewed and approved upfront. So with all that in mind, really, why is a process? Why even have a project intake process? Well, it helps to basically provide clarity for those who are submitting new requests. It helps give them a place on where to go for those new requests and get it to the right team, as well as for the individuals who are actually reviewing those requests. It helps give them a designated area to actually review that information and know where to go. So really at a high level, it helps to provide more clarity and eliminate confusion, and basically make sure that all the information is captured up front in the right place. So how do we move from maybe this as is or standard process, well, where we don't have a process, to establishing an intake process in Hive? Well, that kind of leads us here into where Hive can help. So continuing with our capturing the scope portion here, for today, let's pretend that we work at a company making rocket ships. And believe it or not, this company has perfected rocket science, but they don't yet have a process to deal with new rocket ship development requests. So this is where Hive can come in to help. In Hive, the intake process all begins with a Hive form. So what we'll see is that that form, it's essentially a place you can capture information and the potential scope of this request upfront in one place. Now, the first thing to determine for that form is really what happens to it once it's submitted. In Hive, a form can create a new project once it's submitted, or it can go into a holding project for new intake request to be reviewed, really kind of that home base project. So anytime a form is submitted, it can go into a home base, for example. And while creating new projects directly from a form submission has many uses, for a project intake process, we often find that submitting new forms, or rather submitting forms that way and creating new projects directly off of that, it doesn't always work the best. So we typically recommend actually, when the form is submitting, it going into a home-based project or holding project for where the information can be reviewed and approved before a project is fully built off of it. So that's what we're going to take you through today, is that component of once a form is submitted, it goes into home-based project. It can be reviewed before it actually creates a new project. So now that we've decided what's going to happen once the forms have been submitted, next we can create the form itself, and really even more importantly, the questions that are going to give us and our team the information that we need to effectively review and approve the scope for those new rocket ship requests. So in doing all of this, what it's going to do is it's going to help to address our earlier pain points to establish a process and give the submitters and reviewers a direction for that centralized location of where to go and actually review the information that comes through. So what we'll see in just a second as I jump into Hive is we're first going to build out that project that's going to be our home base project here. Next, we're going to actually build out an intake form in Hive, and then route it into the home base project where it can be reviewed. And as part of building that form, we'll also make sure that we have questions that are part of it so that we can capture our scope up front. So with that, let me jump here into Hive. And the first step, as I mentioned, is we're actually going to create our holding project or our home base project. And that can be done if we just click on the new button here, go to project, we'll give it a name. We'll name it maybe our new rocket ship intake request project. And then from there, we can click through, make sure that we have the right people who need to be part of this. In this case, just want to make sure we have our project request team here. Perfect. We can add and remove users as we need. Basically, give access to the people that need access to this project. Next, we can choose layout. In this case, we can choose any of our 6 layouts. At any point, you can update these. I'm just going to leave it here in our status view. And then once it's created, that's where it's going to default to. If you've gone through and used Hive, you probably know that you can already go and edit these statuses at any point. It does default to unstarted, in progress, and completed. But depending on what you need, you can update these as needed and even add in new statuses. For today's purposes, I'm actually going to leave this as is. I think it's going to fit our needs here. So that's that first step. We've created our home-based project. This is going to be that landing area for new form submissions once they are filled out and completed. So from there, let's actually build out our form. And that can be done, again, by clicking on the new button and then going into request form. And we have our form request library. These are ones that we've built in the past, but let's go through and create one here from scratch. So I'll click this create new form option, and it opens to basically the back end of a blank form. We have here at the top the title area for description, and then our questions are going to be listed out here in the middle. These questions under the toolbox section, these are all the different question types that are available. We won't go through all of them today, but we'll go through a couple of them as we start adding questions to our form, and we can kind of see some of those functionalities that are available. So the first thing is let's add a title. In this case, we'll do new rocket ship request form. We can add a description. This will basically give guidance to our team or anybody who is filling out this form for more information about, or more direction that is about what this form is used for. Let's just say this form is for new rocket ship requests. Perfect. So we have a little bit more description there. Next, let's actually capture the type of questions, or rather add the questions to our form for information that we'd like to capture. So again, this toolbox section lists all the different types of question types that are available that we can choose from. In this case, I'll choose our single input. Let's maybe add an option here for project name. One thing is that each question has its own backend where we can determine where that information gets routed to once it's submitted. So if I click on edit, we give it a title, we'll give it a project name. We can determine whether this question is visible. If it is required, I'm going to click that option here to make it required. And if we scroll down, we can determine if we want this to map to the description of our action card that gets created once the form is submitted, maybe the title of the action card as well. I'm going to have it map here to the action card custom field, and then a project custom field as well. So in doing so, we're going to see that a new project custom field gets created that has the name of this project. It's also rather of the question. And then in mapping to the project custom field, we're going to see a little bit later that once we do convert this action card into a project and move it forward for a full project plan, we'll be able to get back to the details here. So we'll be able to refer back to what was actually submitted for this project if we ever need to see that initial scope. And then once ready, I'm gonna hit OK. So we have our question here for project name. Let's maybe add a couple more. So because we're building a rocket ship, we probably care about the size, or really the crew that's part of it. So maybe let's add an option here as part of a dropdown for crew size. Make this required. Also going to make sure that this gets mapped to action custom field and then project custom field. Then we just have to add, because this is a dropdown, our choices, which we can do under this choices option. Anytime I add choices here, I always find you can add it here both in the value and text. I just find that adding it through the fast entry option works the best. It's easiest to enter in more information. You can even copy and paste from a list and copy it in here to the fast entry option. But I'm going to do for a crew size, maybe 1 to 2, 3 to 4, and then 5 to 6 members. Hit OK. Maybe we'll also add an option here for the rocket ship type. Maybe as a radio button. Also make it required. And then here I'm going to add it as a project custom field and an action custom field. And then again, add our choices. Maybe this will be a medium distance rocket ship and a long distance rocket ship. Maybe we also care about budget. For that, I can also use a single input option, or drop downs are others. Just for today's purposes, I'll add here for our budget. We can make this a single input, make it a required field, and a project custom field and an action custom field. Then lastly, maybe we can add in an option here for the expected delivery date. So we can use a date field option. Here we'll notice, let's give this a title, expected delivery date. If we scroll down here, we may notice there's a few other fields that are available. We can map this again to an action custom field, project custom field. We can also have this map into the action card due date as well. And then in doing so, whatever date is selected here, once the form is submitted on our action card that gets created from it, is automatically going to populate with the date that we've chosen. Perfect. So let's say that these are the questions that we need here for our scope. Obviously, you can add in more questions. You can even do some more advanced settings in terms of logic, so that depending on what's chosen in one question type, different types of questions appear. We won't go into all those details today, but those are some of the capabilities that are available to you in terms of the forms. So again, let's say that these are all the questions that we need for our scope. The last thing that we're going to want to do is at the very bottom of the form. Here is where we can determine what happens to that form submission once it is completed. So the first option is what we're going to want to end up choosing. And that is that each time the form is submitted, it's going to go into a specific project and get created as a action card within it. There's also options where we can have a new project created directly. Again, there are many use cases for that, but for today's purposes, as part of intakes, we usually find that getting an action card created from a form and then having that go into a home base project really works the best, so that you can set up approval processes and make sure that the scope is approved upfront. So I'm going to do that. Again, we're going to designate which project for this to go to, and we already created that. So we're going to do our new rocket ship. This is where our new rocket ship intake project comes into play, the one that we created a few minutes ago. We can also choose to have this assigned to select people. So what that means is that once this is created, or rather once the action card gets created, it's automatically going to be assigned to select people. So I'm going to have it be assigned to myself and maybe Gina here as well. And so again, what that means is that when this is created, it's automatically going to get assigned to these people. They'll get notified, letting them know a new intake request has come in, so that they'll be able to review the details in the scope that was populated from the form. So from there, I think we're ready to go ahead, hit save, and save this form as an option. A couple things to note. So this is the form that we just created, this new rocket ship request. It's been added to our library here. We could copy this as a URL to send it out externally. We could put it onto a specific place as well, so that users can go there, click on the URL, and they'll be taken into the form. We can also pin this form here to our dropdown. So in doing so, now that we turned on the pen, I just pop out of our form library. I click on the new button underneath the form section. Because we pinned it, it's going to live under that request form section, and we can click in and access the form we built. It's just an easier way to get to it. We can also go to our form request library and then just click on to our form itself. So let's go through the process of filling this out and what it looks like now. So now that we've built a form, let's fill it out for a new request. So maybe we need a rocket ship to Mars. Will be the name of the project. The crew size, it's going to be 5 to 6 people. And we need a long distance rocket since we're going to Mars. Let's say that we have 30 million is our budget. And we want this to be delivered by maybe the end of April. Perfect. So again, you can build out this form for as many questions as you need to capture that scope. This is, let's say for our purposes, what we need here. And again, we see the title of the form listed up top, our directions here in terms of the description. And then anytime we have an asterisk at the end of the question, that just means that it's a required field. So if we try to submit the form without filling one of those out, we're going to get a helpful reminder basically to go back and review those. So once we submit, we'll get a nice screen saying, woohoo, successful submission. And then what that's going to do is it's in our new rocket ship intake request. It's already created an action card here with the details of what was submitted in our request. You'll also notice that it's automatically been assigned to the people that we designated, both myself and Gina, and the details are listed here in this action card. So it got created exactly as we want, where once the form is submitted, it goes into our home base or our holding project to be reviewed further. So let's actually take let's actually go back into our deck and we can go through what it looks like now to the next pillar of today's session, and that's reviewing the scope. So now that we've created a form, built it out, added the questions that we need, let's actually talk about the next step, and that's how to review the scope once it's come through. So effectively what that means is how do we get the right people involved early on to actually conduct and review that scope. Again, just to kind of start this off, well, let's take a look at what we often hear from some of our customers who are just coming on board to Hive. You know, they'll often tell us that the review process can be segmented and maybe not include the right stakeholders. It can be a challenge as the information can be provided again piecemeal, and that there's no real formal process for gaining, tracking the project approvals. So really, all this is to say is that the process can be segmented. It can, still be a challenge to get the right people involved, and that even if people are involved, getting their approvals for a project and approving a new request to get launched into a project, there may not be a formal process there. So we'll see in a little bit how Hive can help with that, and really just making sure the right people are involved up front, have all the necessary information at the beginning is fundamental for efficient project planning and execution. So how can Hive help? Well, jumping back into our workflow for a new rocket ship request, again, now that we have a form constructed and have determined that new requests can go into a holding project or that home base project for further review, Hive offers a number of ways to make sure that the right people are included in that review and approval process. We saw the first of one of the main ways already, and that's to have when the action card's created, that's to have it get routed not only into the home base project, but also already get assigned to specific people. That's one of the main ways that you can make sure that people are already part of a process of those new requests if they need to review it. Another option is that you can use a question type that's available called dynamic users in the form. What this does is it allows the submitter to select a specific person that would be assigned to that request. And then on the back end of that question type, you can have it go and once the form is submitted, and the action card's created, you can have it selected so that it automatically gets assigned to that specific person. Now, there's a couple of different use cases for that, but typically we do recommend having the card automatically assigned to a designated group, basically how we've already set it up, so that when it gets submitted, it goes to that group of people so that they'll be notified of those new requests, and they'll kind of keep that consistency of reviewing to those people. And as needed, they can pull in new people here. So that's actually what we're going to see in a few minutes of, let's say that we are reviewing, we have a question for, maybe a different department that isn't typically part of our review process. How can we leverage some of the Hive capabilities to pull them into the review process to make sure that they get the opportunity to review it and share their input as part of that scope. So we'll see that there's a function in Hive using @mentions. That's a great way in which you can pull people in, bring them into the process and make sure that they are there as part of their review. And then lastly, we'll also see that you can set up an approval route in Hive that can go through and make sure that you get a formal approval, and rather gaining that formal approval of those new requests from new rocket ships directly on the action card. So as part of the action card that was already created from our form submission, still in one place, we can set up an approval process that's going to send approval requests to designated people. They'll be able to review it, and then you can sign off to request changes or denote that they've approved this new request to be created as a formal project. So together, what these will do is they'll help to kind of address some of our earlier pain points by centralizing the process, getting the right stakeholders involved, and then establishing a clear and automated approval process. So let's walk through that a little bit in Hive and how we can set that up. So again, we'll jump back here into Hive. We have our formal. We basically here have our action card that was created from our form. We have the details here, not only listed in the description if we designated it as such, but we also have it here in the custom fields section for information about the crew size, the expected delivery date. You'll notice that date, because we designated it to go to the dates field of action card, is also listed there. We chose for the project name to be listed as well as a project custom field, same with the rocket ship type. So we have a lot of functionality that can be customized to your preferences to whether that should live in the description, kind of denote some of the key components of that action card, or if those should be created as custom fields here. But what we would want to do is really first start to review these details of the form. So these are how we can see our scope of that new request, see the details of it. We can also, if needed, we can add in attachments that can actually even be done from the form itself. You can add attachments directly there. They can get uploaded to the action card here as well. You can also start a conversation in the comments section if you'd like to get more details, you'd like to ask questions. But let's say that we have a department. In this case, it is our guidance system department. As for a rocket ship, they're not always part of our review process, but we want to pull them in here. We have a specific question for them. That's where we can use a functionality for @mentions. We could also just assign out the action card to multiple people here too. But let's take a look at the @mention function. If I just type in @ and then the person's name, in this case, it's going to be D. She's the head of our guidance system department. Let's say that we are pulling you in on this request. Here. So we can pull her in here. She's going to get a notification directly, basically calling her attention to this action card. She'll be able to review into the details. We will also see that if she's conducting her, if she's basically brought in to review, she can write back here, add comments in real time. We'll see basically all of these comment section get updated as we go through. She's @mentioned me back, so I'll get a notification letting me know that she's responded back and can kind of keep up to date with these comments. So again, what that does is it pulls her into the review process. That's one of many ways that it can be done, but definitely a good feature to quickly add somebody into that review. But that's how we can get people and get the right people involved. Again, @mentioning, we can make sure that they're part of the project and even assign this out to them as well. But there's another way too, and in Hive, you can actually have a formal approval process. And the way that can be done is under this approval section. So that is a Hive app that can be enabled from the Hive apps page. And from there, you can set up a approval request. And that can be done by just hitting this approval request option. It's going to come in. Here's our round one and generic stage one, stage two, for example. We can rename these as we want. Let's say maybe this is final rocket request. Sign off. We can even set a due date and a due time. Let's say this needs to be done by tomorrow at 5 p.m. And then we can determine who needs to be part of this. I'll add myself. Let's say we want to get D here from our guidance system department and Gina as well to sign off. There we go. And all we need to do is hit this request approval button. Then everybody here is going to get a notification that there's something waiting their review and approval. They're also going to see an item at their top of their My Actions page as well to indicate, hey, you have something that's awaiting your review and approval here. There we go, listed out here. It's going to capture the name of the action, the stage of review, the project that it's in. And then if we have a due date and a due time, it's going to be listed here with some helpful color coding that anything in the future, it's going to be listed in green. Anything in the past is going to be listed in red. And then if it happens to be due that day, it's going to be listed in a yellowish orange color as well to help us kind of prioritize when things need to be done. And then as we are going through, we can also see when people have approved, if they are currently reviewing here as well. They can add comments here too, basically to indicate some additional details as part of that review. And it looks like Gina and Dee have already approved, so we see their termination and a timestamp in which they've approved. I can go ahead and conduct my review. We'd start by clicking this review button. That helps to indicate that I am currently reviewing. I can go back, review these details. If I have any questions, I can obviously go back and add comments here into the comment section to add questions and kind of work off of there. I can even update these things as I need to as part of our scope review. So I'm going to go ahead and approve. So what that means is that we've gotten sign off and approval on this new rocket ship request to be built. So from there, again, what we did is we reviewed the details as part of our reviewing the request scope. We reviewed the details that came in from our form. We could pull in our colleagues here either in the comment section using the @ function. We could also add them as assignees if we need them to review. And then additionally, we can also set up an approval route here using the approval route feature. If we needed to create new stages, we could do that. We could save these routes instead of building them from scratch. We could save them as templates, essentially to save time if we have common approval routes there. We can even set up differing rounds of review depending on how much review is needed for each of these. So from there, let's go ahead and jump back into our slides. And again, so we've gone through the process so far of capturing the scope, using our Hive form and determining where it goes. We've now started our review, or rather we've now completed our review, pulled in the right resources that we need here as well. And now we'll go through the last stage of our pillar here, and that's launching approved projects. So now that we've gained approval to build our next rocket ship, let's discuss how we can actually launch those projects. So effectively, how can we turn our approved requests into full projects? And again, we'll just take a quick step back in terms of what we were hearing as is from some of our customers that haven't yet set up approval processes yet and been able to build out full projects. We often hear that their company prior Hive, that it can be challenged getting everybody on the same page. There might be multiple locations used for housing the initial scope, as well as the dynamic project plans. This might be in different places. It can often be a challenge to create new project plans. It might actually have to have them recreated and just lead to some rework and non-standardized processes there. It can also be a challenge just notifying people that a new project has been approved, and as part of that project, you have some tasks and actions that you're responsible for those to be completed. So those are some of the challenges that we often hear from customers that are just coming onto Hive and maybe don't yet have a approval process set up. So how can Hive help to improve these pain points? Well, one big way is through the project templates. So what we're going to look at here at the moment is actually launching those approved projects and how they can be set up. So again, a big way is through the project templates, and the approved requests can easily be converted into projects with full project plan templates applied. So from there, we can build the full project plans in Hive, save them as project templates, and then this will offer a great starting point and still allow you to tailor your project to the specifications that are needed on the template. So for example, removing actions that might not be needed as part of that standard template, adding in new actions that might be present for that customized project, assigning out the work to different people, and then even adjusting the start dates and end dates for each of those actions. So in doing so, all this will address some of the pain points that were listed earlier to really keep the initial scope present too. We'll also see that once you convert these requests into projects, it does keep much of that same scope information so you can get back to it any time to review. You can mitigate the need to create new project plans from scratch if you're using templates, and then you can easily notify new users that a new project has been created automatically within Hive, so you don't have to kind of get them all together to do so. They're all automatically going to keep up to date with that information through notifications. So with that, let's jump into Hive and see what that looks like. So again, we have our new request here, the details of it listed out in our action card. Now that we've gotten approval and sign off from everybody who needs to be part of this, we can actually convert this directly into an action card. So we can go ahead and maybe mark this as completed, just to indicate that it's been approved and completed. And on the action card itself, using this option here for more at the top right-hand side of the action card, we click on that. And then the third option from the bottom is convert to project. That's how we can convert this action card into a project. It's going to give us a pop-up of whether we'd like to save a copy of this action card. It basically means that in that project, it's going to retain the details of this action card, including the approval route. I typically recommend to save a copy of it. That way you can get back to the details of the approval route. You can get back to the conversation if there's ever a question of it and you would like to go back and kind of see the history of the life cycle. From there, we can convert to project. And it's going to look very similar to what we did earlier in terms of our setting up a new project. Here, it comes in asking if we'd like to create a project new as blank, or we can use a copy or a template. So in Hive, we already have a template built out and constructed for our long range rocket ships. All we need to do is click this use template option, and then we'll get a pop-up drop down that's going to ask us basically which template would you like to apply. Hit my long range distance rocket ship project template. Give this a name. Mars. Rocket ship to Mars, that is. We can choose to have this under a parent project. So if we'd like to keep kind of on our project navigator a structure, let's say that we had, we're building this for a certain customer or a certain group, we could actually have a parent project for all of that and then just list all the other projects underneath it. In this case, I'm going to leave it here as no project. We can choose to copy over the statuses and the assignees of our actions from our template. From there, again, we can make sure that all the right people are involved. We can update this, add new people and new teams as needed. And then under the project visibility, we can choose to make this visible to everybody in the workspace, and we can choose to make this open in draft mode. I do typically recommend that as you're creating new projects, it's a good best practice to put it in draft mode. Essentially what that's going to do is that it's going to list the project in draft mode, and while it's in draft mode, it's going to silence the notifications for your team members as you're making changes. So for example, as you're assigning out actions to people and making changes to those actions, maybe you need to make some adjustments from what came in from your template, it's not going to overly bombard your teammates with notifications. Instead, what it's going to do is it's going to, once you take your project out of draft mode effectively to put it into production and make it kind of kick it off, then it's going to give everybody a single notification letting them know of the changes and let them know that they have new assignments. So with that, a good best practice is to put it here in draft mode. From there, we can choose our layout. In this case, I'm going to choose our Gantt view layout here so we can see our full project plan. We can choose to have different components here for our project settings. And we can, for our action card settings, all this can be updated at any time as needed. So from there, I think we're ready to create our project. And here we have our full project plan. So again, we had a template already pre-created for our long distance rocket ships and those to Mars. We can see the details of those actions that came through. On Gantt, we can actually even click on this gear icon, and that's going to give us the option to pull in start date, end date, duration, predecessor, maybe assignee for each of those actions so we can see more details of it. But what this allows us to do, so again, templates are great starting points, but often you will need to just tailor them to your project and assignment needs. So for example, maybe you could go through and let's say that we don't need to incorporate custom specs. We could choose to delete that or archive it. If we needed to tailor this further and add in new actions here, we can do so by just clicking these plus buttons and add in new actions as needed. Additionally, if we needed to update kind of start dates and end dates for any of these, maybe even increase the duration, we can choose to do that as well.
Andrew, when you have a moment, a couple questions that I think would be good for us to answer live if we can.
Sure. Let's see. So it looks like one came in here of can you do a use case for if a project has been directed and not approved? Sure, we can take a look at that in just a few minutes and what that could look like in terms of getting kind of how that could be set up. And then a second one is how can Hive help communicate new project request status to the requester? So if the requester knows what is happening with the request, our requesters are not Hive users. So how that can be done is in a couple of different ways. And we can take a look at that in a few minutes. One of the main ways is actually through Hive Mail. So you can create those directly from, you can kind of respond directly to those requests from the action card that's created. So I think those are great things. Let me actually just continue here and then we'll be able to come back and actually address some of those questions and kind of see how some of the Hive functionality could be incorporated. So from there, again, you can tailor your project plan for your needs. You can, again, add in new actions, remove any that are here, update your durations, your start dates as well. And then we've also built into this template some placeholders that can be used to quickly assign out actions. What's great about placeholders is let's say that we have this action here for our chief engineer. It's been assigned to chief engineer, maybe our rocket team design lead, and then our safety engineer. What we can do is we can update who's going to be playing that role as part of our project. And anytime that we assign this, so in this case, for chief engineer, we have a placeholder there and we can assign it to Andrew. And then anytime that we have that chief engineer option assigned, it's going to assign that out to any of the other actions in our project where that placeholder is used. Additionally, let's say that we want to update maybe our rocket ship design lead. We'll assign this over here to Brenna. And then anytime that that rocket ship design lead is used, it's going to be listed here for Brenna. So we can do that, continue to tailor our project needs, basically, rather tailor our projects as we need to, and start to assign our actions. But let's say in this case, we've assigned out all of our actions and we're ready to take it out of draft mode. All we need to do is click this option, to take it out of draft mode here, and then the users are going to get a notification letting them know of some of the changes, and then any time that they're assigned to those actions. So that's effectively what we can do to kick off our project and put it into production. So from there, just to do a quick recap on some of the items we covered before we go into the questions further. Really, as a quick recap of some of the things that we've covered today in terms of our 3 pillars around how you can capture the scope, how you can review the scope, and then launching those approved projects. We saw for capturing the scope, that's where you can create a project intake, or rather a home base or an intake project for those reviews. And then using Hive forms, you can set up all the questions you need to capture that information upfront so that when it's submitted, it creates a new action card in that project that can be reviewed further. You can assign it directly to people when it's submitted. You can pull in new people as well. And that's kind of part of this reviewing the scope, where you can pull in new people using the @mention function. You can assign out that action card to different people. And then you can even set up an approval route process directly on the action card as well. If the project is fully approved, maybe it's ready to be launched. From there, that's where you can take advantage of some of the Hive features around templates and being able to build out a full project plan with just a few clicks of the button using those project templates. So before we go to questions, just want to kind of send a helpful reminder here of some of the resources at your disposal. Help.hive.com is a great way you can access any of our help articles. A lot of times they have helpful information in short little videos about how to actually kick off a feature or some of the capabilities. You can always take advantage of the blue question mark on the upper right-hand side of Hive to send our support team a question or a message if you'd like a little bit more details or kind of help address maybe a use case that you have. And if you'd like a demo, if you are not yet a Hive user and like to learn a little bit more about it, you can visit hive.com and get in touch with our support team there to help set up a demo. So with that, let me just again say thank you for your time here as well, and hope you've enjoyed our webinar here in terms of how Hive can be used to support a new intake process. And let me see if there's any questions. Gene, I know you had mentioned there's a few that have come through. I think that first one was around a use case if a project has been rejected. And that's a great question. One way in which it could be done, if I just jump back here into my project intake request, let's say that we have our statuses here for unstarted, in progress, completed. Let's say that we maybe want to add a status here for on hold, or we can even add one here for rejected. And let's say that this are the form that we submitted, instead of it being approved and completed, for example, maybe it is actually rejected. Edit the name. We could keep it here as in rejected. So there's a few different options. If you would like it to go back through, maybe one of the users actually had clicked request changes. What that could be done instead is you could even set up a new round of review, send it around to the same people, and they can review the information, maybe have a couple questions that can be addressed here in the comments section, and then it can be sent back around. So to say that another way, you can take advantage of the comments section to ask any questions that might be needed. Maybe somebody clicked their request changes button to reject it because they need more information. Those questions can be addressed here in the comments section. But if it's fully rejected, then you could also just move it here into rejected. And then how that can be done is it can live there just to indicate that, hey, this has been rejected. We've chosen not to go forward there. And then I know we have another question here for how can Hive help communicate new project request statuses to the requester? Well, one thing that can be done, so if you have users who live outside of Hive, what you can take advantage of is through the Hive mail section. So you can integrate your Hive mailbox with Gmail and Outlook. And then this is a good way that you can communicate some of the information back to the requester itself. So first, you can set up your form so that when a form is submitted, I can send a email notification and kind of the details of what was submitted back to the person who submitted it. So that's first just to let them know that their request has been fully submitted. You can also, if they're outside of Hive, one way that you can keep them up to date is through this Hive mail integration. You can directly on the action card, so you don't need to go to a separate location. You can quickly compose a new email here and keep them up to date of the latest status directly. So that's one way in which you can kind of keep them up to date and basically keep them informed there. And it looks like we have another question here, kind of a follow-up, but the approval reporting only shows items that are under review as cards. It doesn't show the projects that are in flight. Got it. So I think this is around the approvals review. And that's something we can kind of cover maybe offline. I think this is with Veronica. Maybe offline we can kind of get in contact with you and around how approvals view can work. And for those who may not be aware, approvals view is an option where we can kind of track your approvals, and it's through a Hive app here on this side. So a little bit out of scope for today's session, but Veronica, maybe we can get in contact with you after this training to kind of go through that a little bit further. And it looks like we have another question here from somebody. Maybe their question got cut off. Is there a way to? I'm not sure who submitted that. But here in the meantime, let me just pause, see if there's any other questions that have come through chat that we can help to address. All right, I guess if no other questions, thank you for your time today. We can definitely get in contact with anybody who would like a copy of this deck. We can share that out to any of those users there. And hope you have enjoyed today's session, kind of as we've taken you through some of the different ways in which you can create an intake process in Hive using Hive forms, the action cards to actually review those as part of a project home base, and then kicking off new and approved projects.